a world hidden behind the sun, a race of gods who vanished but never truly left. Tonight, we uncover the secrets of Nibiru and the Anunnaki's unimaginable decision to cloak an entire planet from the universe. Welcome. If this is your first time here, I'm glad you found this corner of hidden knowledge. Be sure to subscribe to the channel so you don't miss what's coming next. Let me know in the comments where in the world you're watching from, and what time it is right now, day or night. This story connects us all. And if what you're hearing already feels different, share this video. Let's see who else begins to understand the truth behind the mystery in the title. What kind of civilization chooses to vanish its entire world behind a star's blazing glare? In the hidden corridors of our solar system, where science meets myth and astronomy brushes against ancient memory, lies the story of Nibiru, a planet cloaked in silence, orbiting on the edge of perception. From the very beginning, Nibiru defied everything we understand about planetary motion. It did not follow the calm, elliptical path of familiar worlds. Instead, it wandered, surged, dipped, and vanished, carving a trail through space that seemed more like the echo of a cosmic secret than a natural orbit. Ancient sources whispered of a wandering star, but what truly set Nibiru apart was its intentional disappearance. When their world began to fracture, the Anunnaki, the godlike beings who ruled it, realized they needed to do more than survive. They needed to disappear. This wasn't a trick of shadows or some magical feat. It was engineering at a scale so massive and precise that it bordered on the divine. The Anunnaki didn't simply hide Nibiru in darkness. They placed it within light, an overwhelming radiance that rendered the planet invisible to any eyes, human or otherwise. Behind the sun, beyond the grasp of most telescopes, exists a region known to astrophysicists as the solar magnetic dead zone. It's a place where light bends unnaturally, where gravity warps like silk, and where electromagnetic signals vanish into the roaring silence of solar radiation. In this impossible blaze, a world can linger unseen. The Anunnaki guided their planet deliberately into that corridor of brilliance, using solar magnetism as both camouflage and anchor. Nibiru did not vanish into exile. It stepped into a throne of light, hiding not in shadows but in the blinding blaze of our star. But hiding a planet is no simple matter of location. The Anunnaki understood that the sun's glare alone wasn't enough. They constructed what their fragmented texts call a cloaking field, an electromagnetic veil wrapped around the planet's body. This wasn't invisibility in the traditional sense, it was distortion. The field bent thermal emissions, muffled magnetic pulses, and folded ambient light, creating a skin of silence around the world. To our satellites, Nibiru would appear as noise, an error, a glitch, a patch of meaningless data in a sea of solar interference. Ancient sources describe this cloaking not as a device, but as a living structure woven from the planet's own core energy and activated only when the world aligned with the sun's energy stream. For thousands of years, this field kept Nibiru hidden, drifting like a phantom behind the fire. Even more perplexing is the orbit Nibiru followed. Unlike any known path in our solar system, it moved through what some theorists now call a fractal orbit. Rather than a single, clean ellipse, Nibiru's trajectory appeared to fracture over time, splintering into gravitational echoes. As it moved across the outer solar system, tidal forces from nearby planets warped its crust and split parts of its mass, not into moons or debris, but into ghost-like companions, shards of matter that followed the original path in a kind of gravitational chorus. This theory helps explain the appearance of strange, fast-moving objects that have entered our solar system in recent years. Oumuamua, One-I, Borisov, and other mysterious intruders. These may not be random visitors. They may be fragments of Nibiru, pieces of a world still following the trail it left long ago. The implications of this are staggering. If Nibiru was shattered, its orbit refracted like light through a prism, then its return would not be the reappearance of a single planet. It would be a procession, an echo, objects arriving, one after another, each dragging pieces of the original world behind it. Like scattered memories, slowly finding their way home. And while each fragment may seem insignificant, together they whisper of something far larger, something just beyond the veil. The idea that we are already seeing parts of Nibiru without recognizing them changes how we think about space entirely. It suggests that the universe doesn't forget, it remembers, patiently, quietly, in magnetic fields and gravitational shivers. But how does a planet maintain its course in such a volatile region? The answer lies in the heliomagnetic corridor, a narrow river of magnetic flow shaped by the sun's own emissions. This corridor is not empty space, but a channel of solar particles moving with eerie precision. Within it, Nibiru could drift almost effortlessly, stabilized by the very star that hides it. To an outside observer, the corridor appears chaotic, but within its current, motion becomes smooth, like a ship riding the calm center of a storm. Some theorists suggest the Anunnaki didn't just use this corridor. They refined it, reinforced it with pulses from the planet's core, a kind of magnetic surfboard, gliding along a river of light and force that holds the planet steady and silent. This sanctuary in light is what makes Nibiru so difficult to detect. Its cloaking field, its alignment with solar emissions, and the very nature of the corridor itself combine to create the perfect illusion. A world hidden not by darkness, but by radiance. Ancient cultures may have known more about this than we give them credit for. From the Sumerian texts to Incan sky lore to the mysterious twin sun references across early civilizations, the theme recurs: a hidden sun, a veiled star, a celestial visitor seen only during certain ages or alignments. These weren't metaphors, they were memories, echoes of a truth seen in the sky and passed down as myth when words failed to contain what they witnessed. Then came the pulse. For thousands of years, Nibiru's presence within the corridor was stable, its cloaking field consistent, its orbit patient. But recently, deep space monitoring stations picked up something strange. A brief fluctuation in the sun's magnetic harmonics. A small dip, barely noticeable, except to those who knew what to look for. To most, it was dismissed as background static. But long-period intruder theorists recognized it immediately. They call it the return pulse, a tremor in the corridor, a signal that something massive is moving again. Not toward us yet, but adjusting, realigning, preparing to shift out of its sanctuary. If ancient texts are correct, this pulse is the breath of the hidden star, the first sign that its long silence is ending. What does it mean when a world begins to wake? It means that the laws of our solar system are more fluid than we thought. That light can become a hiding place. That memory can take the form of magnetic fields and orbital echoes. And that somewhere behind the blinding roar of the sun, a lost planet may be stirring once again. We are not merely stargazers anymore. We are witnesses, observers of a drama that began before Earth formed its first continents. If Nibiru is truly shifting in the corridor of light, then we may soon find ourselves looking into the sky and seeing not just stars but history, returning like a whisper through the blaze. A planet doesn't scream when it dies. It sighs. It shifts in ways too subtle for the untrained eye but devastating in consequence. The collapse of Nibiru did not begin with fire or catastrophe. It began with rhythm, the internal hum of a world falling out of harmony. For millennia, the Anunnaki believed their planet was self-correcting. Its eccentric orbit, strange seasons, and periods of turbulence had always been part of its character. But deep beneath its surface, far below even their most ancient cities, Nibiru's core had begun a slow rebellion. Its molten heart, once stable and balanced, began to twist. And the first sign of that fracture was the pulse. Inside vast subterranean monitoring halls, chambers older than any Anunnaki kingdom, great crystalline pendulums once recorded the rhythm of the world. These instruments tracked the pulse of the core itself, converting the planet's magnetic fluctuations into harmonic tones. The Anunnaki didn't just observe these patterns, they listened to them. Their world had a heartbeat, and they had grown accustomed to its song. Then, one cycle, The tone dipped out of key, out of phase. The readings surged erratically, then flatlined for seconds at a time before violently returning. What should have been a gentle, planetary breath now felt like the gasps of something suffocating. At first, they blamed the instruments. Explorers descended into the lower chambers to recalibrate the ancient sensors, only to feel the truth in their bones. The floor itself trembled beneath them, not from surface quakes, but from something deeper. The planet was speaking, not in language, but in shudders, groans, harmonics too low for ears, but powerful enough to move stone. The Anunnaki called it the inward collapse, a term that described a phenomenon they had never encountered, not an asteroid strike or external invasion, but a failure from within. It was as though Nibiru's very soul was unraveling. Storms came next, not in the sky, but beneath the ground. Entire regions experienced synchronized earthquakes, not random or chaotic, but strangely patterned, like waves crashing against invisible shores. Mountains cracked along unnatural lines. Plains folded like soft cloth. Oceans did not merely churn, they hissed, boiled along their edges, releasing steam into a sky that could no longer regulate itself. Atmospheric pressure spasmed. Sunlight arrived twisted, refracted through strange clouds of red ionization. The sky shimmered in torn veils, and above the capital, new auroras flickered in colors no Anunnaki had ever recorded before. The environmental anomalies were just symptoms. What terrified the Anunnaki most was the change in time itself. Their days shortened by seconds at first, then minutes. Seasons arrived unpredictably. Plant cycles warped. Migration patterns of the native fauna fractured. Nothing moved as it should. Clocks, which had once aligned perfectly with the core's pulse, began to disagree. Even light itself behaved differently. Sunrises shimmered and broke into fractal patterns. Sunset cast impossible shadows. Something inside Nibiru was altering the entire framework of its physical laws. And still, the collapse deepened. The ruling councils, once composed of serene, lie-torn philosophers and engineers, became frantic. Their deliberations grew heated. Enki warned of cascading failure, that if the core lost alignment entirely, the planetary shell would follow. Enlil, ever the pragmatist, argued that their only hope lay in evacuation, not repair. Their conflict, once intellectual, became deeply personal. But beyond the politics and the power struggles, the unspoken truth weighed on every voice. The Anunnaki had never faced extinction. They had uplifted species, reshaped stars, and conquered biology itself. But now, they were at the mercy of a world tearing itself apart, molecule by molecule. What made the collapse worse was its intelligence. The planet wasn't falling to pieces randomly. It seemed to be unraveling deliberately, as if the collapse had a mind. Energy flows beneath the surface shifted in organized spirals. Magnetic lines twisted into knots that followed fractal paths. Scientists theorized that something in the core had reached a state of chaotic equilibrium, a balance so fragile that even observation could destabilize it. They tried to slow the collapse with stabilizer towers, vast crystalline structures meant to redirect magnetic lines and pacify tremors. For a time, they worked. Regions calmed. Light patterns returned to something resembling normalcy. But it was only a lull. The moment that changed everything came without fanfare. The Great Observatory, a structure that had stood longer than recorded memory, tilted. Just a few degrees. It had never moved. Not through storms. Not through wars. Not through prior orbital shifts. But in the silence of a crimson dawn, its alignment beam flickered, missed its target, and went dark. Panic spread, not because a building had failed, but because a symbol had fallen. If even the observatory, the eye of the gods, could break alignment, then nothing was sacred. The Anunnaki gathered in towers, looking toward a horizon that seemed to ripple like mirage. And as they stood in silence, a question they had long avoided finally surfaced. What do you do when your planet no longer obeys the laws of its own existence? Reports came in from distant provinces. Valleys once dormant now glowed with molten seams. Ancient rock faces cracked open, revealing inner hollows of red light and magnetic haze. Animals fled their natural habitats en masse. Skyships, once stable in the upper atmosphere, lost levitation, crashing in slow spirals as gravity pulsed like a living thing. One crew reported seeing a crack in the sky itself, an aurora that formed a perfect ring, inside which stars appeared to bend. Instruments failed to explain it. Enki believed it was the manifestation of a core-generated harmonic burst, an event predicted only in theory, where the internal resonance of a planet creates spatial interference. By this point, the Anunnaki knew the collapse was beyond them. Their technologies, their wisdom, their attempts to shape the future, all had failed to save the present. Nibiru was not dying quickly, but thoroughly, not exploding, but decomposing. And through that slow undoing, the civilization that had once believed itself invincible faced a truth no technology could soften. Their cradle, their world, their heart of origin was slipping away, and with it, everything they had ever been. As the tremors grew deeper and the harmonics more erratic, the Anunnaki began to look not for salvation, but for remembrance. Recorders were sent across the planet to capture the sound of the final days, the tones, the vibrations, the last rhythmic echoes of a world unmaking itself. Not for study, not for repair, but for memory. They knew the song was ending, and even gods mourn their final notes. When a world teeters on the edge of collapse, the greatest threat is not always the destruction itself, but the division it causes within those who must survive it. On Nibiru, as the planet's core pulsed with mounting instability and the skies rippled with the evidence of impending doom, the Anunnaki faced not only environmental catastrophe, but a war of ideology that would fracture their people forever. Two names rose above the chaos: Enki, the master of adaptation, and Enlil, the voice of command. They were not merely leaders, they were forces of vision and purpose. Twin stars pulling the fate of their civilization in opposite directions. Enki believed in life, in creation, in the sacred right of all species to evolve with their world rather than escape from it. He saw the collapse not as an end, but as a transformation painful. Yes, but potentially enlightening. He argued that if the Anunnaki could understand the mechanisms behind the planetary failure, they might still stabilize it, or at the very least, carry that knowledge into the cosmos to guide future generations. Enlil, however, saw only disaster. To him, logic dictated retreat. He was the protector of order, structure, and continuity. In his eyes, Nibiru had become a liability. The longer they hesitated, the more lives would be lost. He believed that only swift evacuation could ensure their species' survival. Their disagreement was not new. For thousands of years, their views had clashed in council meetings and quiet chambers, but always within bounds. Now, those bounds shattered. Enki's followers began building stabilization towers across the continents, vast crystalline spires designed to reroute the planet's failing magnetic grid. These towers pulsed with harmonic resonance, attempting to soothe the planet's chaotic rhythm like a mother calming a child. He believed that Nibiru, like any living being, was capable of healing. Enlil saw such efforts as futile distractions. His engineers constructed massive exodus platforms, structures the size of cities capable of launching fleets into the stars. These weren't traditional spacecraft, but gravitational launch systems that lifted entire vessels through resonant levitation and interstellar corridors. With each tremor of the Earth, the tension between them grew sharper. When skies dimmed or magnetic storms pulsed across cities, each side blamed the other. Enki's faction accused Enlil of abandoning their heritage. Enlil's followers warned that Enki's idealism would doom them all. The capital, once a harmonious beacon of their civilization, became a fractured mirror of their growing conflict. Silent hallways echoed with whispered arguments. Families found themselves divided. Friends ceased speaking. Even the symbols etched into the levitating walkways flickered with inconsistent tones, as if the planet itself sensed the growing rift. The tipping point came when a stabilization tower in the northern highlands collapsed. It had been under construction for cycles, and its failure resulted in a catastrophic pulse that knocked out the cloaking field for an entire orbital window. For the first time in millennia, Nibiru became partially visible to the outside cosmos. To Enki's side, this was a setback, a temporary failure in a bold experiment. To Enlil, it was confirmation of everything he feared. The world was not just dying, it was becoming dangerous. Exposure risked attracting the attention of external civilizations, and the last thing Nibiru needed, he argued, was to be discovered while it was most vulnerable. Enlil pushed for immediate deployment of the evacuation fleets. He ordered the launch of several vessels, even before the council had reached consensus. Enki protested, warning that the strain on the planetary energy grid would be catastrophic if done without synchronization. But Enlil would not wait. In a single night, 20 ships rose into the upper atmosphere, their departure sending out pulses that triggered atmospheric instability. A storm formed across the equatorial regions. Lightning twisted in spirals. Auroras rippled across previously unaffected regions, and the schism became permanent. In the days that followed, the Anunnaki Council attempted to broker peace between the factions, but it was too late. What had once been philosophical divergence was now civil fracture. Enki and Enlil no longer addressed each other directly. Their followers built separate structures, occupied separate levels of the floating capital, and even encoded their communications with different resonant frequencies. Enlil's ships began arming their hulls, preparing for possible conflict, not with outsiders, but with other Anunnaki. Enki's vessels carried scholars, healers, and genetic archives. They avoided confrontation but refused to yield the skies. Across the surface of Nibiru, the planet itself seemed to reflect the division. Cracks formed in symmetrical patterns across the continents. Regions loyal to Enki saw magnetic stabilization succeed briefly before failing under solar pressure. Enlil's evacuation zones experienced atmospheric thinning, the byproduct of high-energy launch fields. Even the weather split. Enki's zones cooled with controlled harmonics, while Enlil's grew hotter, denser, choked with the energy of Exodus preparation. It was as though the world was being pulled apart by the very ideologies that claimed to save it. Still, amidst the chaos, there were attempts at unity. A group of neutral archivists pleaded for a ceasefire in the skies. They proposed a shared Exodus timetable and offered to sync the planetary energy grid to allow both efforts, stabilization and evacuation, to proceed without interference. But their proposal was ignored by both factions. Each saw the other's strategy as an existential threat. The idea of compromise had faded with the last successful cloaking cycle. Now, it was a race against time and each other. As the capital flickered under the pressure of internal discord and external collapse, a new reality set in. The Anunnaki were no longer one people. They were two civilizations, born of the same world but destined for different stars. And though they had once walked the same crystal bridges, read the same living symbols, and stood beneath the same auroras, now they looked at one another as strangers, not with hatred, but with sorrow. For all their power, they had failed to remain united in the face of fate. This division would not end with Nibiru. It would follow them into the stars. It would echo through the colonies they would establish, the life they would touch, and the myths they would seed. And somewhere in the memory of every child born after that day would linger the pulse of a dying world and the two voices that could never agree on how to save it. Before Nibiru trembled, before it cracked and groaned and threatened to swallow itself, it stood as a world of staggering elegance. At the heart of this world was its capital, a city unlike any ever conceived on Earth, a metropolis that floated not with magic, but with mastery, suspended above scorched canyons and glowing fault lines. This city soared on rings of gravitational stabilization. From a distance, it appeared to hover like a crown, set delicately on the brow of the planet, illuminated by a halo of refracted light. Its rings of architecture rotated slowly, humming with a harmonic frequency tuned to the pulse of Nibiru's core. Here, architecture was not a structure, it was a symphony. The capital was layered in concentric discs, stacked vertically and connected by bridges of translucent crystal that changed hue with every pulse of the planet's energy. These pathways were alive with color, tone, and motion. As one walked, the very stones beneath one's feet vibrated softly, emitting harmonic pulses tailored to mood and identity. Buildings, towers of black obsidian tipped with glowing sigils rose from the rings like fingers reaching into the sky. They were not just shelters or seats of government. They were instruments, designed to conduct and harmonize with the magnetic flow of the planet itself. Some said the capital resonated so purely that you could hear Nibiru breathe if you stood still long enough. Within this architectural marvel existed a society structured with deliberate elegance. The Anunnaki were not a homogeneous people. They were castes intentionally designed, strata of purpose and form. At the highest level stood the Lightorn, the ruling class whose bodies shimmered with subtle internal luminescence. Their eyes carried golden irises that glowed faintly in the dark, and their skin bore faint fractal markings, organic tattoos of light encoded with lineage and status. The Lightorn were scientists, explorers, and guardians of cosmic knowledge. They interpreted the pulse of stars, navigated interstellar currents, and preserved the memory of forgotten epochs. To gaze upon a Lightorn was to witness what thousands of years of directed evolution could produce. Below them stood the stone-bound, the architects and builders, whose physical strength and sensory acuity surpassed even the finest augmented warriors. They shaped crystal and metal not with tools, but through harmonic guidance. Their hands resonated with subtle tones that allowed them to cut stone without fracturing it, to levitate platforms without resistance. They were the engineers of Nibiru, the ones who carved levitating platforms, maintained the capital's massive bridges, and attuned the magnetic engines that kept the city afloat. Though they lacked the glow of the Lightorn, they bore strength and skill that ensured the planet's survival for generations. And then there were the echo forms, enigmatic and rarely seen, even by other Anunnaki. These beings lived beneath the capital, maintaining the deep tunnels and harmonic engines. They were engineered for quiet work in the planetary core systems. No one knew how many existed or how long they lived. They moved like shadows, guided by ancient programming or perhaps something older. Rumors whispered that the echo forms communicated not with speech, but with vibrations toned so low they passed through walls like a subterranean whisper. Their presence was mysterious, but essential. Without them, the city's heartbeat would stutter. Without them, the entire world might have failed long before the collapse began. The city itself was not built with dead materials. It was alive in subtle ways. Every surface, from the crystal walkways to the obsidian towers, contained reactive glyphs. These glyphs shimmered with meaning, changing color and form based on thought, intention, even memory. They weren't decorations. They were a living language. The Anunnaki wrote through presence, communicating in pulses of light and energy that radiated outward from their touch. To walk through the capital was to read a poem of civilization every corner, every bridge, every hall, a stanza in the great story of their world. At night, the city transformed. Bridges that had been glass clear during the day became veins of golden light. Towers projected symbols into the air, casting luminous patterns across the clouds. Soft, harmonic tones vibrated in the atmosphere, engineered lullabies meant to soothe the planet's electromagnetic tension. The skies above reflected these pulses, as if the heavens were echoing the city's song. On terraces and open platforms, families gathered to meditate, to sing, to align themselves with the pulse of the city. These moments of unity were not just rituals, they were necessary. Anunnaki society thrived on resonance, not metaphorical harmony, but literal energetic alignment. But as the planet's pulse faltered, the city responded. Bridges began to flicker. Glyphs dimmed. The tones in the air lost their clarity, becoming discordant, painful. Some symbols refused to respond to touch. Others changed meaning entirely, as if the memory of the city were failing. The levitation rings, once steady and smooth, began to wobble subtly. At first, these fluctuations were dismissed as anomalies, minor glitches in systems older than memory. But then came the great tremor. On one quiet evening, the capital's third platform tilted, just slightly. The floating rings groaned against their stabilizers, and the entire city shifted. It was the first time in recorded history the capital had moved without instruction. Families froze. Engineers rushed to harmonic control centers. The towers did not fall, but their golden projections shimmered violently, flickering between unknown symbols and blank light. Something had changed beneath them, something deep, foundational. The city had felt it before anyone else. And in that shift, the truth was undeniable. Even the heart of their civilization, their sky-born sanctuary, could not escape the unraveling of their world. Still, the Anunnaki continued their rituals. They walked the dimming bridges. They pressed their hands against fading glyphs. They whispered to the sky in songs meant to stabilize the atmosphere, to ease the planet's pain. In every floating plaza, small groups gathered to watch the towers and the stars beyond. Many believed the sky was listening. Others believed it was already morning. The floating capital was a testament to what the Anunnaki had been. It represented their unity, their knowledge, their belief that harmony between biology, architecture, and energy could create paradise. But now, cracks formed beneath that dream, not just in the walkways or the engines, but in the people themselves. And as the city dimmed, it did not simply mark the collapse of a structure, it marked the end of an age. The fading light of a civilization that had once believed it could outlast the stars. There is always a moment before the end that feels like calm. It doesn't announce itself with thunder or warning. It arrives quietly, like a breath held just a second too long. On Nibiru, that moment came unexpectedly. After cycles of rising tremors, magnetic storms, and glowing fractures rippling across the surface, the planet suddenly paused. The capital, high above the fire-scored plains, floated in perfect stillness. The towers, which had groaned and tilted only days before, stood upright. The skies cleared. The bridges of light shone steadily again. For the first time in what felt like an eternity, everything held its place. Many believed it was a sign that perhaps the stabilization towers had finally done their work, that Enki's vision of planetary healing had succeeded. Scientists paused their frantic recalibrations. Builders stopped reinforcing the levitation engines. Children played on the crystal paths again, their laughter returning to the walkways like music forgotten. Elders stood at the open balconies, eyes lifted to the newly quiet heavens, daring to believe the worst had passed. Across the rings of the capital, lights that had flickered for weeks now glowed with steady rhythm. The city once again became a sanctuary in the sky. Temples that had remained sealed during the height of the tremors reopened their doors. Inside, harmonics resonated through vaulted chambers. The glyphs returned to their soft brilliance, responding gently to touch. High priests read the patterns of the auroras and interpreted them as favorable. In the lower city, food halls filled. Families gathered in the communal gardens, basking in the gold-tinted light of a planet that no longer seemed to strain against itself. That night, for the first time in many cycles, temple bells rang not in mourning, but in joy. Even Enki, who had grown wearied by the weight of failure, dared to hope. He walked the inner walkways of the observatory's lower chamber, watching as the crystal alignment beam flickered back into form. It wasn't as strong as before, but it held steady. He turned to his team and smiled, a rare and silent gesture that said everything. Maybe, just maybe, the collapse had stabilized. Maybe the core had realigned enough to prevent total failure. Maybe Nibiru, wounded and trembling, could still survive. Yet deep beneath the calm, in the veins of the planet itself, something ancient shifted. In chambers far below the city, below even the echo-form tunnels pressure built. Energy, once guided cleanly through the core harness, now churned in chaotic patterns. The final stabilizers held but barely. Their systems were overwhelmed, managing resonance not through control, but through resistance. The readings were there, but no one wanted to see them. No one wanted to believe that the silence above was being paid for by chaos below. As dawn approached, something subtle changed. The air grew heavy. The temperature shifted, but not in the usual seasonal rhythm. The light turned pale, not the vibrant gold of sunrise, but a diluted shimmer, like the glow of memory rather than life. Walkways, once firm underfoot, carried a faint hum again, one that didn't match the capital's known frequencies. Echo forms, silent for weeks, began appearing near the upper rings, moving in deliberate patterns. To those who watched closely, it was clear they were preparing for something. Then came the taste. It was always the first true sign. Nibiru's air was rich with ions, tuned to the planet's magnetic cycle. When it changed, so did the taste. That morning, the atmosphere carried a strange metallic edge, soft at first, then unmistakable. Citizens began whispering about it, unsure of what it meant. Animals native to the higher altitudes began behaving erratically, flying in, wide, looping patterns or clustering in places they had never roosted before. The harmonic towers emitted sharp pulses so brief and high-pitched that only a few could hear them. But those who did fell silent. By mid-morning, clouds had lowered unnaturally, not the thick thunder mist that came with magnetic storms, but thin, high-altitude sheets of gas that drifted just above the tallest towers, obscuring the sun's usual arc. The sky was no longer blue-gold. It was ash-grey, tinged with subtle crimson, a reminder of the energy trapped within the dying core. Bridges of light still held, but some flickered at the edges. Symbols glowed inconsistently. The city's tone had changed again. Not violently, but uncomfortably. Something was unraveling. Then the observatory beam so recently restored shuttered again. Not a flicker this time, but a full collapse. The alignment crystal, once the heartbeat of planetary guidance, cracked down its center. Its hum, once a song of clarity and direction, fell silent. Engineers stood around it, too stunned to react. They didn't try to repair it. There was no protocol. The beam had never failed twice. As the realization spread across the capital, calm returned, but it was a different kind. Not hope, but resignation. People moved more slowly. They held each other more often. In the great plazas, groups sat in silence, watching the sky. The final quiet evening came, without alarm or sirens. No towers collapsed. No platforms failed. No tremors shook the earth. Instead, there was stillness, an unnatural, almost sacred pause. And in that silence, every Anunnaki, whether light-torn or stonebound, leader or laborer, felt the same thing. The story of their world was ending. The great capital held itself together that night. The levitation rings hummed softly. The lights burned with dignity. From orbit, it would have looked unchanged. But inside, everyone knew the truth. This was not peace. This was the pause before descent. A world exhaling for the last time. The last time the city would stand untouched. The last time the towers would sing. The last time the people would gather as one. They did not scream. They did not panic. They watched. They remembered. And they waited. When morning came, and the fractures beneath the crust opened again with renewed force. When the stabilizers began to fail in rapid sequence. When the sky dimmed not from clouds but from energy collapse. They were ready, not to fight, not to flee, but to carry the memory of that final calm into the stars. The last night on Nibiru was not a night of terror. It was a farewell, a whispered moment held in the hands of a civilization that had once touched the edges of creation. Long before the collapse threatened to end everything, the Anunnaki had built machines that touched the edges of impossibility technologies so advanced. They blurred the lines between life and design. These were not machines of war or conquest. They were guardians, stabilizers, memory keepers, and bridges across time and space. And at the center of them all was the core harness, a living engine that wrapped around Nibiru's molten heart like an iron cocoon. The core harness wasn't a reactor. It was an orchestra of harmonics, magnetics, and living circuitry designed not to extract energy, but to regulate it. Its purpose was to maintain planetary balance, redirecting violent pulses from the core into smooth, rhythmic waves. It was vast, a network of crystalline corridors and glowing nodes stretching miles beneath the surface. To walk inside, it was to feel the heartbeat of the world under your feet, a low, endless tremor that resonated through your bones. Its pillars pulsed with plasma light. Its bridges floated without support. And its operators, specially trained Anunnaki engineers, walked with reverence, treating the space like a sacred organ of their civilization. For thousands of years, the core harness kept Nibiru from tipping into chaos. During periods of orbital stress, it absorbed seismic pressure and stabilized tectonic flow. But when the inward collapse began, the harness flickered. At first, the rhythm simply shifted, like a singer missing a note. But then, entire conduits sputtered, magnetic veins darkened, stabilizers overloaded. The harness, once flawless, began to lose synchronization with the planet's natural frequency. Engineers worked desperately to reharmonize the core. But the damage was no longer mechanical. It was foundational. The core itself had changed, and the machine that once sang in harmony with the planet now groaned in dissonance. Yet the Anunnaki did not rely on a single system for survival. Across Nibiru stood the biotemple structures unlike anything Earth has ever known. These towers weren't built in the traditional sense. They were grown. Their walls were made of living crystal, capable of healing, learning, and responding to thought. They were not only temples of faith and philosophy, but centers of genetic science, memory preservation, and cellular regeneration. Inside these towering sanctuaries, the Anunnaki extended their lifespans not through surgery or implants, but through resonance. The biotemples worked by emitting harmonic waves that washed over the body, healing not just tissue but restoring the fractal patterns of DNA itself. Illness, aging, emotional trauma, all were treated with carefully tuned frequencies that passed through living crystal like music through a shell. The biotemples also housed the genetic archives of the species. Inside vast atriums floated strands of glowing data, spirals of light that contained the essence of every caste, every ancestral line, and every life form uplifted by the Anunnaki across the stars. But as the core harness faltered, so too did the biotemples. Their harmonic fields became unstable. The living walls cracked and dimmed. The glowing DNA threads that once floated like cosmic silk began to fade. Some blinked out completely, entire lineages lost in silence. It was as if the memory of life itself was unraveling. Priests and geneticists tried to preserve what they could, compressing archives into crystalline shards, hoping to carry the essence of their civilization aboard the evacuation fleets. But they all understood the truth. If the biotemples went dark, then everything the Anunnaki were, their science, their history, their soul, would be gone. Even then, one last hope remained: the lightfold gateways. These were not portals in the way humans imagine them. They did not rip space open or rely on brute force propulsion. Instead, they folded space gently, like silk drawn into a single point. With the right frequency and alignment, a person could step through one and appear in a system light years away, without acceleration, without travel, without time. The lightfold gates were the crown jewels of Anunnaki expansion. They connected Nibiru to distant outposts, research colonies, and forgotten sanctuaries scattered across the galactic rim. To walk through a gateway was to defy the cosmos itself and to feel it thank you for the grace. But even these divine machines had limits. As Nibiru's magnetic structure buckled, the gates began to fail. Fold patterns grew erratic. A journey that once took seconds began to generate unpredictable feedback, harmonic crashes that tore through corridors like lightning storms. Several gates were shut down permanently after a folding attempt led to an implosion in the lower capital ring. Others lost their spatial anchors, reappearing in void regions with no stable connection. What had once been their greatest freedom was becoming their greatest liability. Engineers made the painful decision to disconnect the main planetary gates, severing contact with dozens of colonies in a single breath. The silence that followed was unbearable. Worlds that had once pulsed with life, children of Nibiru, were now unreachable, and those on the surface knew they were truly alone. In desperation, the Anunnaki began converting the smaller, localized gateways into data transmission nodes. Instead of moving people, they moved knowledge streams of compressed harmonic packets containing history, blueprints, memory, and music. They launched these packets into stable regions of space, hoping some would survive, hoping one day someone would listen. Some say a few of these messages made their way to Earth, encoded within ancient artifacts, waiting to be deciphered by a species just beginning to understand resonance. But the most haunting truth was this: the Anunnaki were running out of systems to save them. The core harness could no longer stabilize the planet. The biotemples were fading. The lightfold gates were collapsing. One by one, the pillars of their civilization dimmed. They were left with only one path: evacuation, and even that, they knew, would not be enough to save everyone. Still, they did not surrender. They documented everything. They encoded memories into crystal. They turned entire structures into time-locked vaults of sound and light. And then they turned to the stars. A world was dying beneath their feet, but their eyes were on the void, on distant planets, on the chance that somewhere, in another sky, life could continue. And from that hope came a final decision: Earth, a world young enough to adapt, rich enough to sustain, and quiet enough to shelter them. But they would not arrive as a single people. The rift between Enki and Enlil had grown too deep, and as the last systems shut down, their paths, like the technologies that once bound them, would begin to diverge. The moment the Anunnaki accepted that Nibiru could not be saved, everything changed. Gone were the long debates about planetary stabilization, the endless recalibrations of failing harmonic engines. What remained was a single, terrifying question: where do you go when your home becomes uninhabitable? It was a question not just of survival, but of destiny. And so, the greatest minds of a collapsing world gathered one last time, not to save Nibiru, but to chart the path beyond it. The council hall, once a place of vision and grandeur, had become a war room, floating above the trembling capital on a pillar of magnetized stone. The hall no longer echoed with songs or ceremonial harmonics. Instead, it shimmered with tension. A planetary hologram hovered at the center, its once stable projection now riddled with fractures, glowing like wounds across Nibiru's crust. As the image rotated, every council member, scientist, architect, priest, and elder saw the same truth. The planet was unraveling faster than anyone predicted. Stabilization was no longer a question of effort. It was a question of futility. Enlil was the first to speak with finality. His voice, once measured and proud, carried the gravity of inevitability. We do not survive by looking backward. We must become something more than this world. We must become memory in motion. His statement ignited a wave of quiet horror, not because of what he said, but because no one argued. Enki, though visibly shattered by the acknowledgement, stood and offered a path forward. He proposed not merely escape, but a dispersion of knowledge, sending fragments of their civilization into the stars, embedding history into crystalline vessels, ensuring that even if their people perished, their memory would not. To Enki, The failure of Nibiru was not an ending. It was a seed, one that must be planted carefully. But before any plan could be executed, a choice had to be made. Where to go? The Anunnaki possessed star maps unlike anything humanity has ever seen. Networks of charted systems, coordinates buried within lightfold gate logs, and biological compatibility scans gathered across thousands of years. But the requirements were precise. They could not simply land anywhere. The world they sought needed to have specific conditions. Magnetic stability to support their harmonic technologies. An atmosphere dense enough to preserve energy systems. A rotational cycle that wouldn't strain their biology. And above all, gold. Gold, for the Anunnaki, was not a symbol of wealth. It was essential. It stabilized their planetary cloaking fields. It bound their atmospheric containment systems. It conducted energy in a way no other element could, on Nibiru. Gold was integrated into the very air, used in suspended particles to maintain atmospheric cohesion. Without it, their shielding systems would fail, their ships would degrade, their people would suffer, and among the dozens of worlds they considered, only one had the necessary abundance of gold and the potential to adapt. Earth. It was young, turbulent, and raw. Its ecosystems were untamed, its sky unshaped by harmonics, and its surface wild with chaotic beauty. But beneath its oceans and mountains lay rivers of gold, untouched, and waiting. Enki saw something else in the blue sphere, a promise. He believed Earth held more than resources. He believed it held potential. Its early biosphere could, with time and care, to support a new beginning. Enlil, on the other hand, saw strategic isolation. Earth was distant from major galactic pathways. It was shielded by a solar system rich in gravitational barriers. It was a fortress as much as a sanctuary. Arguments erupted. Some factions wanted to head toward ancient outposts, reconnect with lost colonies. Others wanted to drift in the magnetic voids of space, waiting for a new home to appear. But every scenario returned to the same constraints: distance, time, energy, survivability. Earth, imperfect and primitive, was the only viable option. And so, with heavy hearts and sharpened focus, they began to prepare for exodus. Across the trembling planet, vast launch rings rose from the crust. These weren't rockets in the human sense. They were gravitational spirals, structures that bent local fields to lift entire fleets into the upper atmosphere without the violence of combustion. From a distance, they appeared as glowing towers of light and stone, rotating slowly, emitting deep pulses that resonated with the planet's dying hum. Within them, ships were suspended like seeds in a pod, cradled by magnetic stabilizers, protected from the growing instability below. The platforms operated in cycles. Every few hours, another fleet would rise. Some carried people, others carried archives, crystalline vaults of data encoded with their history, science, language, and DNA. A few bore sacred artifacts, resonant relics meant to preserve the frequency of their world. The sky above Nibiru became a spiral of light, dotted with the shimmering paths of departing vessels. For a brief moment, the heavens glittered like they had when the world was young. But it wasn't enough. The launch platforms could not carry everyone. Millions were left behind. Some stayed willingly, guardians of memory who believed that the planet deserved witnesses in its final moments. Others never had a choice. Not all regions had access to the rings. Not all castes were chosen. The evacuation forced decisions no society should ever face. Who goes? Who stays? What knowledge is saved? What is lost forever? Enki ensured that the genetic archives, those precious strands of light and memory, were given priority. His ships became arcs. Carrying the essence of species, Nibiru had uplifted and guided across millennia. Enlil's fleets, larger and more militarized, focused on control. His vessels carried guardians, infrastructure, and systems for establishing authority wherever they landed. The schism that had torn their planet would now travel with them. The Exodus was not a united mission. It was a divided inheritance. As the last days of Nibiru unfolded, the skies pulsed with departure. From the highest terraces of the capital, those left behind watched the trails of the departing vessels like strands of golden thread unraveling from a celestial loom. Some sang songs from the old cycles. Others sat in silence. But all understood what was happening. A chapter was closing, not just for a planet, but for a civilization. The final launch occurred beneath a violet sky, as the core trembled with low, continuous tones. The last platform rose slowly, bearing a ship unlike the others. It carried a message, a beacon encoded with harmonics meant to broadcast their story across the stars, a record of who they were, what they had built, and what they had lost. As the platform cleared the atmosphere, the planet below rippled in slow, aching spasms. The skies dimmed, the auroras faded, and the echoes of the final departure drifted into silence. They had left behind a world not because they hated it, but because they loved it too much to watch it collapse with them still inside it. They had scattered their memory across the void in hopes that someone, somewhere, would one day find it and understand. And as they turned their ships toward Earth, they carried with them not just knowledge and technology, but longing, guilt, and the weight of everything they could not save. The Anunnaki did not leave Nibiru as one people. As their fleets rose through the collapsing skies, glowing spirals lifting them toward the stars, the divide between Enki and Enlil deepened into something unbridgeable. What had started as a philosophical disagreement over planetary salvation had evolved into an ideological rift so deep that even escape could not heal it. The Exodus was not a journey of hope alone. It was a migration fractured by conflict, carrying not just survivors, but a war that would echo far beyond Nibiru. Enki's vessels were designed with elegance and purpose. Each one shimmered with blue harmonic shielding and was guided by navigators trained not just in astrophysics, but in resonance flow. These were arcs, carrying genetic archives, healing chambers, and memory crystals, tools of preservation and rebirth. Within them were the scholars, the builders, the harmonists, and those who still believed in adaptation rather than domination. Their maps were flexible, their goals open-ended. They searched for places where life could grow again, for ecosystems where Nibiru's legacy could evolve into something new. Enlil's fleets were built for authority, angular, dark, and armoured with crystal-forged plating. His ships bore the markings of control. They carried warriors, governors, an infrastructure built to establish footholds. His strategy was clear: find a new home, secure it, impose order. His followers saw Earth not as a partner, but as territory, not a refuge, but a possession. To them, survival required structure, hierarchy, obedience, and anything less was chaos. The two fleets did not travel together. Even in space, they separated. Their routes diverged, Enki choosing a slow arc through the quiet corridors of the outer system, pausing to scan magnetic anomalies, to listen for signs of life. Enlil took a direct path, piercing the cosmic dark like a blade. His ships moved in formations, their shields overlapping, their signals tight and encrypted. Enki broadcast harmonics in the open, letting the stars know he was listening. Enlil stayed silent, avoiding detection. It was a contrast not just in method, but in belief. This divide was felt by those on board. Entire families had been split during evacuation. Some ships carried siblings torn from each other by last-minute decisions. Lifelong friends now travelled on different paths, one under the banner of peace, the other under command. Even in the silence of space, the tension persisted. Whispered transmissions leaked between vessels, stories of sabotage, of ancient feuds, rekindling in the corridors of ships, drifting through interstellar night. Navigators spoke of ghost echoes, ships that had gone dark without explanation, drifting silently into the void. Not every vessel made it to their destination. Not every captain remained loyal. Enki's fleet reached the outer solar system first. They paused in orbit near Saturn's magnetic field, using it to amplify long-range scans. From there, Earth was a pale dot, just beginning to shimmer with complexity. Its oceans danced with potential. Its crust throbbed with tectonic rhythm. Enki's scholars read the signs and wept. They saw a future in that blue world, a canvas where something ancient could take root again. He ordered the first ships to descend in observation arcs, slow and wide, careful not to disturb. Enlil's fleet followed days later. They did not pause. They approached Earth like a campaign. Scouting vessels dropped into high orbit, scanning for mineral concentrations, gravitational patterns, and surface geometry suitable for infrastructure. Where Enki saw possibility, Enlil saw risk. He noted Earth's magnetic irregularities, its unstable weather cycles, its biological unpredictability. And though he committed to colonization, he demanded control. His first settlements would be fortified. His technologies would not be shared openly. The world would serve order or not at all. Even before they set foot on Earth, the seeds of conflict had already taken root. Enki's people began constructing resonant temples aligned with the planet's magnetic flows. They built harmonic fields designed to ease the transition between Nibiru's frequency and Earth's. Enlil's followers constructed containment grids, atmospheric shields, and command towers carved from impact-forged stone. They did not harmonize with Earth. They subdued it. The first conflict occurred above the surface. A navigational relay station constructed by Enlil's engineers emitted pulses that interfered with one of Enki's research vessels mapping the ionosphere. At first, it was blamed on instability. But when the interference continued, accusations followed. Communications grew hostile. Messages that once carried warmth now came clipped and formal. Some ships stopped responding altogether. Enki tried to intervene, sending emissaries through low-orbit gateways. They carried offers of shared technology, of integration between projects. Enlil rejected them. He issued a command: no further contact. Each faction would pursue its own path. Shared orbit did not mean shared purpose. From that moment on, Earth became two colonies, one rooted in resonance and evolution, the other in command and precision. As settlements formed, early humans, still in their primordial development, watched the sky and saw what they could not understand. To them, the Anunnaki were gods, descending in radiant light or booming thunder, bringing with them tools that reshaped the land. Enki's emissaries came with knowledge. They taught the movement of stars, the language of stone, the rhythm of life. Enlil's agents brought laws. They built walls, established rituals, imposed cycles. Early human memory recorded both as truth, and over time, those truths became myth. The conflict between Enki and Enlil did not fade with distance. It embedded itself into the DNA of civilization. It shaped humanity's oldest stories, tales of gods at war, of brothers divided, of law versus freedom, fire versus water, sky versus earth. In every corner of the ancient world, echoes of their schism remained. Temples built to resonate with the stars stood beside fortresses built to dominate them. Languages evolved with dual meanings. Symbols of life carried hidden markings of control. Even today, that division lingers. In our myths of angels who fell from grace, in stories of creators and destroyers, in the conflict between curiosity and control, we inherited more than genetic fragments. We inherited a war that was not ours, but one we carry nonetheless. It flows beneath the surface of our beliefs, our structures, our dreams. The Anunnaki did not mean for their conflict to shape us, but in fleeing their dying world, they brought with them more than memory. They brought their unresolved past, and Earth, young and innocent, became the stage for an ancient drama still unfolding beneath the stars. Before the Anunnaki ever walked the Earth, The sky changed, long before words were carved into clay or gods were given names. The planet trembled under a force it could not name. Nibiru's first approach was not witnessed by science, it was felt by every living thing. Birds shifted their flight patterns. Animals fled highlands. And even the oceans seemed confused, rising too early, then withdrawing like breath held too long. It was not a singular moment, but a cascade of changes. A great planetary unease that swept across continents before the crimson sphere even became visible. To the ancients, this was not a planetary body. It was a god, a star with a tail, glowing red and veiled in light, moving not like the moon or sun, but against the known rhythms of the heavens. Cultures separated by oceans, Sumerians, Egyptians, Mesoamericans, Chinese. And the early peoples of the northern steppes spoke of it in different names but the same tone: awe, fear, reverence, in the carved stones of the Andes. It was called the Wanderer. In Akkadian tablets, it was the Destroyer. In oral traditions, it was often remembered as the Red Sun, or the Eye that Burns. When Nibiru became visible in Earth's sky, it did not rise like a normal celestial body. It appeared suddenly, not at dawn or dusk, but in the middle of known cycles, shimmering through the high atmosphere as a glowing red orb behind translucent clouds. Early witnesses described it not in shapes, but in effects. The air grew dense, electric. The clouds glowed from within, and at night, the stars near the horizon twisted out of alignment. It did not move fast. That was the strangest part. Nibiru drifted, like a thought returning, like a forgotten memory being remembered too clearly. Civilizations reacted in wildly different ways. Some, like the priest-kings of early Kemet, built new altars overnight. Their records speak of a sun that passed beside the sun, and rituals were held to honor it, to beg protection, or perhaps favor. In the Far East, astronomers etched symbols of a fiery bird into stone, what later would be called the Red Phoenix, a cosmic force that flew only once in 10,000 years. In the high plateaus of what is now Peru, spiral stones were arranged to reflect light, not from the sun or moon, but from this mysterious third glow that hovered for weeks. Some fled underground. In regions of what would become Eastern Europe, early settlements with subterranean chambers show evidence of a sudden mass migration, people abandoning the surface during a period of unusual seismic and atmospheric events. Was it panic, or memory passed down from an even earlier visitation? The timing aligns eerily with magnetic anomalies found in ancient ice cores layers that show atmospheric dust far higher in metallic content than surrounding centuries, consistent with an external gravitational event disrupting volcanic activity and wind patterns. And the oceans, always the most honest record keepers, reacted first. Coastal tribes across what is now Asia and the Pacific Islands preserve stories of the sea walking away. Tides reversed, then surged inland with no warning. Massive rivers rose up their banks and flowed backward. In some places, lakes disappeared completely, only to return later, overflowing their ancient boundaries. Geological evidence supports this. Unusual silt deposits found hundreds of miles inland, layers of shell and marine life embedded in the rock of deserts and mountains. These were not myths born of fear. They were memories etched in nature. And across every culture that experienced the flyby, the details overlap with eerie precision: strange tides, a red haze in the sky, a humming sound in the air, and a world that, for a brief time, felt pulled out of alignment with itself. Scholars once dismissed these tales as flood myths or sun cult exaggerations, but when viewed through the lens of long-period orbital dynamics, they make sense. A large, cloaked object entering the inner system through the inbound corridor would exert subtle but global gravitational influence, just enough to bend tides, crack tectonic plates, and disturb electromagnetic balance. Volcanoes erupted out of season. Trees shed leaves, as if it were winter. Though it was summer, In Mesopotamia, inscriptions tell of a fire in the wind and the ground becoming soft. Chinese records from later dynasties reference an earlier age when the stars moved like smoke above fire, an image consistent with atmospheric lensing caused by magnetic interference. In Mesoamerica, the Mayan long count calendar begins near the same epoch as one of the strongest recorded magnetic anomalies in Earth's crust. Coincidence? Or echo? But the most chilling accounts are not about fire or floods. They are about sound. Many early texts, from Sumerian to Vedic, speak of the hum beneath the sky, a low, continuous vibration that moved through the ground and the body. It was not thunder. It was deeper, older, like the planet itself was resonating with something vast and approaching. In some regions, massive stone structures, megaliths, dolmens, ringed monoliths were constructed not to observe the stars, but to reflect or focus this sound. Recent studies have shown that many ancient sites produce strange acoustic phenomena, echoes that shift, tones that pulse when exposed to specific frequencies. Did the Anunnaki know this would happen? From orbit, they would have observed the effects. They would have seen humanity's fear, awe, and confusion. Some scholars suggest that this first encounter with Earth's biosphere was what convinced Enki to believe in the planet's potential. He saw that it was sensitive to resonance, that it remembered, that it listened. Enlil saw something else. A world easily shaken. A species easily impressed. A place that could be shaped. The flyby left more than physical scars. It left psychological imprints that echo still. Even after Nibiru slipped back into the corridor, behind the brilliance of the sun, Earth retained the memory. Magnetic anomalies remain buried in rock. Old myths speak of return cycles. Atmospheric data from ice cores and ancient tree rings show abrupt shifts. The world calmed, but it never forgot. And now, with the detection of the return pulse, the cycle may be beginning again. In every age of the world, there comes a time when the past stirs beneath the surface. The sky shifts. The animals grow restless. The earth hums not with fear, but with memory. And maybe, just maybe, what we call prophecy is not about the future at all. It's the past returning, wearing a new face, the same face humanity saw thousands of years ago when a hidden world passed by and whispered through the air. I am still here. I have a. After the skies calmed and Nibiru retreated behind the sun, the echoes it left behind did not fade. For the Anunnaki, survival was only one part of the plan. The greater mission was memory. What good was a civilization that endured if everything it knew, everything it had built, was lost to time? And so, in the final days of their world, the Anunnaki undertook a monumental effort to embed their knowledge into the bones of the cosmos, not in fleeting messages or fragile technologies, but in structures that would outlast even stars, vaults of stone, memory encoded into resonance, messages carved in silence. Deep beneath the levitating cities of Nibiru, the first memory vaults were carved. These were not tombs or archives in the traditional sense. They were labyrinths of crystalline halls, designed to store more than words. The Anunnaki did not write history with ink, they recorded it in vibration. Every wall in these chambers pulsed softly with resonant frequency. Each curve, angle, and carved surface was designed to reflect and amplify sound in a specific harmonic range. Within these frequencies were layers of meaning, star maps, genetic blueprints, philosophical texts, and records of species the Anunnaki had encountered or shaped. The most advanced vaults weren't built, they were grown, engineered from living crystal capable of regenerating itself over millennia. These vaults could heal cracks, repel invasive signals, and adapt their frequency when exposed to new atmospheres. They were designed to survive planetary collapse, deep impact, even interstellar drift. When Nibiru began to fail, these vaults were sealed, not destroyed, not dismantled, sealed. behind harmonically keyed gates that could only be reopened with precise resonance patterns known to a few. Some Anunnaki believed they would one day return to these vaults. Others knew they never would. But Nibiru wasn't the only canvas. Earth was chosen not just as a refuge, but as a continuation. The Anunnaki brought their memory systems with them, not in grand buildings, but in seed form. Crystalline cores capable of integrating with local geology. Harmonically tuned slabs of stone that responded to pressure and sound. Objects that, to an untrained eye, looked inert, decorative, perhaps even primitive. But under the right conditions, they awakened. Many of these artifacts were buried deep, hidden beneath temples, beneath mountains, beneath deserts. Some were hidden in plain sight, stone rings, pyramids, aligned monoliths. What made them unique was their orientation. These structures did not point toward Earth's cardinal directions. They pointed toward the stars, not just random constellations, but specific alignments, to Nibiru's orbital path, to the positions where gravitational anomalies would reoccur, to locations where solar magnetic fields bend light in just the right way. The Anunnaki understood something. Modern science is only beginning to rediscover that stone can remember, not in letters, but in vibration. Certain materials, quartz, obsidian, metallic composites store energetic imprints. When exposed to sound, heat, or electromagnetic waves, they resonate, not randomly, but in patterned responses. The Anunnaki called this passive resonance memory. They used it not only in temples, but in tools, navigation beacons, even personal communication devices that activated only in the presence of certain tones. On Earth, these devices still exist. Some remain dormant. Others have flickered to life under rare conditions. In the highlands of Anatolia, ancient stones have emitted unexplained pulses when struck with specific frequencies. In the Amazon, buried beneath jungle overgrowth, geometric platforms have been found that vibrate slightly when solar radiation peaks. In deserts, once home to lost civilizations, standing stones align perfectly with magnetic anomalies, humming faintly during solstices. These are not accidents. They are the fragments of a map, a forgotten system of communication waiting to be heard again. Even more mysterious are the pass-through devices. To modern observers, they appear as slabs of stone, plates of metal, or geometric objects with no function. But the Anunnaki designed them with intentional dormancy. They do nothing until the right frequency passes through. Not electricity, not touch. Vibration. When exposed to harmonic resonance encoded with specific data patterns, these devices activate. Symbols appear where there were none. Surfaces glow. Stone becomes interface. It's not magic. It's precision engineering on a scale we are only beginning to understand. A few such devices have already been found, though often misinterpreted. Some were dismissed as ceremonial. Others were taken apart and destroyed before their purpose could be understood. But in a few rare cases, researchers have reported anomalies. A stone ring that distorted sound in an unnatural way. A chamber in a megalithic temple where footsteps echoed with delay, despite no change in size or surface. A carved wall that vibrated under human breath alone. Most write these off as coincidence, but the patterns continue, and they match the structures left behind on Nibiru. To the Anunnaki, preservation was sacred. They didn't want to rule Earth. They wanted to embed within it the seeds of memory so that one day, when humanity evolved, when it gained the sensitivity to perceive more than matter, it would hear what had been waiting. This is why their structures are never isolated. Every ancient site aligns with something another site. A star path, a magnetic corridor. These alignments form a network, and that network, when fully uncovered, tells a story, not a myth, a record, a memory encoded into stone. Why hide it this way? Why not simply teach the knowledge directly? The Anunnaki understood the risk of premature awakening. Knowledge without context becomes control. Technology without wisdom becomes tyranny, and so they chose patience. They scattered their records in ways that only a curious, awakened species could decipher. They made their memory vaults part of the Earth's skin, not to protect the past, but to invite the future. Some believe that when Nibiru returns, these vaults will activate, not with noise, but with light, tone, vibration, that the ancient devices left behind are listening, waiting, and when the pulse matches the resonance of the returning planet, the stones will speak. They will hum with recognition. They will remember. And we will hear the truth not as command, but as invitation. Not as prophecy, but as inheritance. The past is not gone. It's buried singing in silence. And when the world shifts again, the memory may awaken. At the edge of our awareness, beneath the hum of satellites and beyond the reach of telescopes, something vast is stirring. For decades, scientists have dismissed the anomalies, subtle gravitational distortions near the sun, inexplicable heat signatures in infrared readings, sudden micro-wobbles in the Earth's axis. But the pattern has returned, repeating with quiet precision. Those who study long-period intruders call it the return pulse, a rhythmic vibration nested deep in the solar wind, resonating like a buried memory rising toward the surface. This pulse is not random. It surges gently each time the sun's magnetic field shifts. It weakens, then returns, then grows stronger. It matches no known object, no spacecraft, no meteor, no comet, but it aligns almost perfectly with the predicted behavior of a large, cloaked planetary body shifting within the heliomagnetic corridor, the same corridor Nibiru once used to vanish behind the sun. To most, this is noise. To others, it is the whisper of an old traveller, approaching once more. The cloak, that legendary field of electromagnetic silence, designed by the Anunnaki to hide their home, was never meant to last forever. As a world moves through differing magnetic fields and gravitational influences, the strain builds, the veil flickers, and in recent years, we have begun to see the shimmer. Infrared arrays orbiting far from Earth have captured bursts of heat near the solar limb, brief flashes, circular in shape, vanishing within seconds. Each event follows a pattern, a pulse, a gravitational nudge, a dip in solar wind. Taken alone, they are anomalies. Taken together, they form a message. Ancient astronomer priests once called this the veiled sun, a second light that only appeared in rare ages, cloaked by brilliance, heralding change. It was said to arrive when the sky itself began to murmur. And now, strange auroras shimmer in colours not seen before, crimson veils over regions too far from the poles. Atmospheric pressure pulses in waves across continents. The Earth hums not loudly, not violently, but audibly. The Schumann resonance, the Earth's electromagnetic heartbeat, has begun to fluctuate, not erratically, but rhythmically. This is how Nibiru announces itself, not with war, not with thunder, but with resonance. For the Anunnaki, resonance was everything. It governed how they communicated, how they healed, how they preserved memory. It was the core of their science, the soul of their spirituality. And so it makes perfect sense that if their world were to return, the first sign would be a sound, not just vibration in air, but in light, in magnetism, in the bones of the planet itself. Modern science is not deaf to these effects. It simply doesn't know how to interpret them. The old names are gone, the memories fragmented. But across the globe, instruments record things they cannot explain. Vibrations with no source, infrared shadows with no origin, migratory animals shifting course without cause. Even humans, in their quietest moments, have begun to feel it, an unease, a sense of waiting, as if something immense were on approach just beyond the veil of awareness. And maybe that's exactly what it is. If the return pulse is genuine and growing, evidence suggests it is, then Nibiru has begun to shift again. Not rapidly, not yet visibly, but enough to ripple through the corridor, enough to stir the ancient systems left behind, the vaults, the artifacts, the megaliths. They were built for this, not to be activated by human command, but by resonance, and if the pulse grows stronger, they will awaken, not all at once, not like science fiction, but gradually, subtly, a symbol lighting up here, a tone vibrating there, structures responding to a frequency they were carved to hear. Across ancient sites, faint electromagnetic anomalies have already begun. Stones that were silent for millennia now shimmer under specific solar conditions. Subterranean chambers once thought inert now echo in new ways. Researchers walk these halls unaware that they are standing inside instruments designed to detect the return of a world. But the question is not whether Nibiru is returning. It is how we will respond when it does. The ancients remembered its last passage, not with clarity, but with awe. They etched its image in stone, wrapped it in legend, passed it into prophecy. And now, as the cycle repeats, we stand where they once stood beneath a sky that is beginning to shift, above a planet that is beginning to listen. What comes next is not destruction. It is recognition, a remembering of things long buried, a reawakening of memory that spans not decades, but ages. Perhaps that is why Nibiru was hidden for so long, not because it was dangerous, but because humanity was not ready to hear what it carried. This time, things are different. This time, we have tools. We have satellites, sensors, and archives. We have stories that, while distorted, still carry pieces of truth. We have fragments of ancient knowledge, Anunnaki whispers etched into temples, encoded into stone, waiting. And most of all, we have resonance. The same force the Anunnaki trusted to preserve their memory is now moving through our world. The final pulse is not a signal of doom. It is an invitation to listen, to remember, to awaken, and as the skies grow just a fraction brighter, as the veil flickers in rhythm with the sun's breath, we may yet glimpse the forgotten world once more. Not as myth, not as fear, but as part of our own story, returning to complete a circle written in light and silence.